Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly edition of The Wrap. I'm Laura Leslie, WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief.
And I'm Travis Fain, one of WRAL's State House reporters.
And we're in a holding pattern this week.
Yeah, I thought we would get back from the July 4th break and it would be a bit of a go, go, go.
Nope.
Yeah, it was like, it was stop.
Yeah.
Just let's just hang out.
Yeah, so very little actually happening this week with a couple of fairly major exceptions. But one thing that we discovered this week, reported by our colleague, Brian Murphy, is that we're probably not going to see a budget until August or later.
Yeah, and that comes from Jason Sain, who's one of the budget writers in the House, and I think backed up by others. And Sain, surrounded by reporters, just kind of said, it'd probably be more like August. And the reason is schedule. You know, people have to be in town for things to happen. You've got ALEC, which is the, American Legislative Exchange Conference.
Council, yep.
They're holding their meetings July 26th, 28th. John Bell, the House Majority Leader, the other day was literally holding slips of paper that he had asked people to hand him about vacation plans. So, if you're planning on pushing something through and you need all Republican votes to be there, well, all of a sudden you start to look at windows when they are and are not there.
Things like veto overrides, for example.
Right.
I mean, they do have Republicans do have a veto-proof majority in the House and Senate, but only if everybody is there, or if an equal number of Republicans and Democrats are out, pretty much.
And we seem to just be kind of waiting on the budget at this point, which is, the Speaker and the Pro Tem over in the Senate, the big boys are negotiating. It seems like there's several holdups. It seems like they still can't agree on tax cuts.
I've talked to some people who are involved in the negotiations, and they say they have never seen it this bad. I mean, basically, there's no negotiating. Right now, it's like, here's our position. Good day.
Which is fascinating. And we keep hearing that there's a casino proposal that some people want to insert into the budget to authorize as many as 5 casinos. So how much of the holdup is the hardball there? How much of the holdup is hardball on tax cuts? We understand the Senate wants, obviously to go forward with more tax cuts. The House has said that they want triggers. So if state revenue hits a certain area, all right, yeah, then the tax cut goes through. But just, to be a little more careful. NC Innovation, $1.4 billion.
That's a big one from what I keep hearing, that the House is just, because what NC Innovation had asked for was a smaller amount for recurring years. And what the Senate wanted to do is kind of front load that and put the money into it at the start. But there are a lot in the House who are saying, that is way too much money to give to these people before we can see what they can do.
Yeah, and I've actually got a piece this weekend, so y'all can look for that to drop Sunday on WRL.com about NC Innovation. And what their leadership is telling people, among other things, is if we're going to do the endowment model where we don't spend the endowment, we spend the profits that it generates invested in the market, et cetera, then $1.425 billion is the minimum. Like, it doesn't work at $1 billion. Like, if you give me $1 billion, we can't make this work.
Wait a minute.
I'm telling you. So I think that is causing some concern among some. And the John Locke Foundation has pushed back against this thing. They did a tweet where it was a gif of a woman burning money, and the woman was identified as NC Innovation. So if that tells you where that faction is. But we're just kind of waiting on the budget.
In the meantime, Democrats are pushing to uncouple, this won't happen, to uncouple Medicaid from the budget. I mean, it won't happen because it is sort of the sword of Damocles that the Republicans have hanging over Cooper's head to get the budget done. So, but their argument is that, we could be receiving money already from the federal government to make Medicaid expansion happen. But the longer this budget is in a holding pattern, the longer that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and I mean, some people are cycling off of Medicaid because during the pandemic, the federal government said, okay, you can't kick anybody off your Medicaid rolls. Now you can again. So that process is happening again. So there's some concern that some people are coming off who would go right back on. But this just doesn't seem to be an argument that is going to win among Republicans. Democrats are obviously making it because they feel like it's an important policy choice to go ahead and do Medicaid expansion without worrying about the state budget, which we don't know when that will come.
And one thing that we should mention, at a press conference this week, Democrats talked about decoupling the budget from Medicaid. And Representative Wesley Harris had some interesting things to say about his concerns about the state budget. What he noted was that every year we get the consensus forecast, right? And the consensus forecast is sort of by nature conservative, right? Because
Right.
nobody wants to go out on a limb, right? So it's usually very cautious. Well, this is the first year I can remember, really, maybe a long time, that it's had to be adjusted down. Usually
in
it's
the
adjusted.
out years,
Yeah.
not just right now, but like they're saying, we think it's going to go down a little bit.
Right.
But, yeah.
So, and he said that should worry you. If you're wanting to cut taxes, that should really worry you.
Well, what he said was that the combination of that plus tax cuts plan was terrifying. I think he and I have different definitions of what terrifies us. Because what a Phil Berger will tell you is Democrats have been saying we're going to overdo the tax cuts and screw up the economy and mess up the state budget for a decade, and we haven't done that. We're fine. So maybe one day they'll be right, but boy, that day hasn't been yet. And I often wonder what people's lived experience, to the extent they pay attention to these things, versus the political rhetoric they hear. Like that, at some point, if you're telling people it's going to go, but the sky is going to fall, and it doesn't fall, who do they vote for at that point? So.
I will just say, to play devil's advocate, that no trend lasts forever.
True.
And even Senator Berger admitted that when we talked about that recently.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think the problem that they run into is these guys are not going to be the ones to raise taxes if they do run into trouble. Right?
Absolutely.
Which is why we have all this money in reserves.
Right. And then, the reserves, I think, are part of the reason we don't have a budget yet, is this back and forth over, well, how much do we need to be safe so that we're not making deep cuts to protect our tax cuts, which are going to be sacrosanct going forward, I would think.
Right. And in the meantime, though, we should mention a little bit more about casinos. We did hear Gary Robertson, AP, reported just yesterday that Phil Berger had said that there was a better than 50-50 chance that some expansion of in-person gambling would pass this session. That kind of surprised me.
Yeah, it's an idea that's hung around long enough to where I believe it. But if you've seen this draft plan, send it to me, y'all. It is past time to have something on paper about the secret plan to build new casinos in North Carolina. No more secret plans to build casinos in North Carolina. If you want to do that,
just say so.
Just do it. Let's see some language. And I think rank and file lawmakers are concerned by this, that, some people are discussing this and we don't know what it would look like. And, where would these casinos be? How many? I've heard 5 at this point. I think 3 was what I was hearing at one point. Now I'm hearing 5.
You're hearing 5. Although I think one of the big questions that I'm hearing is this going to be a local, can the locals decide to do this or not?
Yeah, good question.
Because that's I think one of those things that would be a deal breaker for a lot of the conservative folks. In the House especially, if the locals don't have a referendum on it, if you're just going to say, hey, we're going to plunk a casino down to your county, no, that's yeah.
Yeah, and these are the kind of things that would be. This is why we write stuff down in the legislative process. I would like to see that process start as opposed to just being discussed in someone's office.
Anyway, speaking of writing stuff down, we had a look at a new bill this week, which was a flash in the pan for real. It was kind of gone before it got here. It is a new education bill called the Children's Laws Omnibus, and it is the Parents' Bill of Rights on steroids and then some. So, what the Parents' Bill of Rights did a little, this does a whole lot. For example, 5 people from a community could basically go to court and sue a school superintendent for interfering with their fundamental right to parent, whatever that is. I'm not sure. And then if the judge finds that all 5 of them are right, then the school district either has to fire the superintendent or they have to cut off his state salary, which is the vast majority of his salary.
Yeah, it's to make it way, way easier to fire superintendents. It also says that if a kid has a library card, they have to get in writing permission from their parents to have that library card, or that library card would be canceled. And that's not just at school libraries. That's
libraries. Right. And public libraries would have to lock up everything that could be harmful to minors. It's like that would be the whole library, y'all. I mean, everything but the cookbooks.
Basically, they would have to have an adult section if they wanted to have adult books. And it's not clear how controlled the access would have to be.
Does a romance novel count as that?
I don't think that's
it's got sex.
Eye of the beholder there. This one set off some alarm bells, including with some Republicans who were like, "Ooh, I don't think we're going to do that, y'all." And so it was on the calendar for a committee hearing, and then it got pulled hours later. And I guess it's going to come back, maybe.
I'm wondering how much of it might show up in the budget. Because as you pointed out, some of the things that were in this bill were provisions in the House budget. Not all of them, and not the most outrageous stuff, but some of them. This also might have just been an attempt to mollify some of the folks on the far right who wanted to see some of these things brought out and debated, get a chance to have them have an airing. I know that the NC Values Coalition was involved with this in the drafting of the bill and was planning to testify at that hearing Wednesday that was so hastily canceled. So I kind of think we're going to see more of this, but it's hard to say what form we might see it in. Didn't mean to give him a demotion. Representative Torvitz appears to be the person who's sort of steering this boat in the House. It's a Senate bill. It's a gut and amend. So, he said he's hopeful that it'll come back up. He thinks there's a lot of good ideas in it.
Yeah, and I wonder, too, how much of it was when we get to this part of the session, sometimes people have to prove to others that, the longer we're here, the more.
There's a reason that they send everybody home this time of year, right? We know this, right? Because that's what happens. The crazy ones start to come up, right? That's when you get the stuff that makes the headlines. Keeps us in business, not so great for them. We should mention.
Speaking of business,
CNBC loves us again. God, we are boosters in this state, aren't we? I'm going to break my arm from patting myself on the back for North Carolina.
Well, it's a big deal. Second time,
it is.
The second year in a row, we're number one in CNBC's rankings of friendliest states for business. I think so. My understanding is that this is the only the second time in the rankings history a state has gone back to back. Governor's office says since 2017, North Carolina has placed in the top 5 of state rankings 4 times. Of course, Republicans are going to say it's because of all them taxes we cut and those business friendly policies. And of course, I think they got quite the argument there.
Sure.
It sure does. But divided government also seems to have kept us away until this year from some culture war fights. And CNBC noted that and noted the abortion bill and said, hey, this is part of our metric, quality of life.
That metric got lowered on us. That was our lowest metric, was sort of their life, health, and inclusion, or whatever it was, that, sort of quality of life stuff. So, our ranking was already pretty bad, and now it went down like 10 points, I guess. So, yeah.
Yeah, so CNBC was kind of, hey, guys, just, you're doing great, but just a little note here. Let's make note of this. And I will also note that, we talk about you got to have jobs for workers.
Right, but you got to have workers for jobs.
Right, and we're one of the 3 worst states to work in, according to Oxfam. They say North Carolina, Mississippi, Georgia, and it's because of our minimum wage. We don't do mandated paid leave. We're also right-to-work states, which is an anti-union kind of thing. So just, remember us poor workers when you're talking about how great things are.
And remember how important it is to have good schools, as this goes forward, because, some of the stuff that's gone through, some of the changes that are being made in the budget, for example, the expansion of the vouchers program, Democrats say would have a really negative impact on the state's educational system. So now whether that's right or not, of course, remains to be seen. But
Right. I mean, the governor would tell you it's a state of emergency. He has used that term repeatedly, and I believe continues to be traveling the state trying to whip up support. In quite a few counties at this point, I've seen where school boards have passed resolutions asking lawmakers
not to
do that. And I mean, I think it's a fait accompli that this Opportunity Scholarships program is going to expand. There may be some question of how much. That's something that, as the budget is kind of ground to a halt, I don't know where the minds are as far as fully funding that program.
Speaking of education, we should mention that charter bill that went through. This was on Wednesday, possibly the only actual legislative business that really got done this week, I would say. Went to Cooper's desk from the House. This bill would allow for the first time for charter schools to get building construction money, capital money from county governments. In the past, it's been that counties and the state have paid to operate the buildings like they do, public school buildings, like schools, right? But the buildings themselves for charter schools had to be purchased without public money. And so charter schools for a long time have said this is unfair, because the public schools get all this other money and we got to have bake sales. What is this? So this bill would allow them to go to their county Board of Commissioners or County Board of Education and say, we need $11 million for a new building. Or, and of course you can imagine the traditional public school folks are really concerned because there's already a shortage of capital in most counties. You've got lists of schools that are like decades behind in renovations, schools that need to be built, and this would just be one more competition factor in that.
Yeah, and it would be up to county commissioners. Bill passed Wednesday. It's House 219. Had 4 Democrats voting for it, which we often see.
They are charter school pro-charter school Democrats for sure.
You think the governor will veto it?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either.
That's a good one.
I would lean toward. I'd lean toward yes. I mean, honestly, at this point, when in doubt, stamp it out. Did I make that up? Patent pending, y'all.
I think I would call that a ritual display of. At this point, they've overridden so many vetoes, and there's some more coming next week, we expect. Before we get to there, though, we want to mention a couple things. So the reg reform bill, the House decided not to concur with the Senate's changes, so that now goes to conference committee. And we heard that they did take out the language that would make it so the state couldn't regulate PFAS.
Or that would make it much more difficult to do so. And Lisa Sorg, by the way, had a piece this week that says DEQ is going to pursue legally enforceable limits for several types of PFAS in groundwater and surface water. That's something DEQ announced this week. I always recommend Lisa Sorg from, I guess it's called NC Newsline now, right. Formerly NC Policy Watch. I always recommend her as a read on environmental issues.
No kidding. She is essential. Big news, well, sort of, kind of. Mike Woodard, he's been in the Senate for 11 years now, is going to run for mayor in Durham. And for those of you who don't know, Woodard was on the city council in Durham for 7 or 8 years before he ended up in the state Senate. So, so he's real familiar with that. And, I talked to him on the phone when he announced it, and he just kind of said, well, I like both of my jobs, but I've had a lot of people approach me about running for this, this mayoral. I know. And he said, Travis is going to laugh. You're sitting here laughing. He said, Travis is going to laugh when I say that because you're going to say who?
It's always, someone's always afraid. It's never your idea to run for office. It's always.
But he said, because, honestly, we've covered some of the dysfunction on the Durham City Council. The fist fight.
There was a fist fight.
There was a fist fight. And then another member was being, investigated for corruption.
Never changed, Durham.
It is a hot mess. So, yeah, I guess if there were ever a time that people were going to say, please run for something, they might have a reason to.
Yeah, we should mention quickly the other candidates. First of all, Mayor Elaine O'Neill, not seeking re-election, so it's an open seat.
Right. And he said that was what really prompted him to run.
There's a community activist named Charlita
Burris and Sylvester Williams.
And they've both run for the seat before and not won it. So right. I would think he would be the automatic front runner.
Yeah, at this point, but filing isn't done yet.
There you go. Yeah.
Mark Anthony Middleton has mentioned that he might want to run, or at least he's rumored to want to run, and there's still time for him to get into it too.
All right. Durham politics.
Good stuff, y'all.
Speaking of elections, you got a story today, Friday, about some concerns, bipartisan concerns with Republican election bills that are bubbling up from local boards of election.
Right. And the bills aren't, but the concerns are. This is a letter that was sent to lawmakers on Wednesday. It's from the Election Board Association of North Carolina. It is a bipartisan group right now. The chairman is a Johnston County Republican, who I've been trying to get a hold of today and haven't been able to. But it is signed by 32 local election board members, including some who have served for more than 30 years.
Yeah.
So they know what they're talking about. And what the letter said is basically the 2 Senate bills at 747 and 749, and then there's also a House Bill 772. I'll get to that in a second. They said that all these bills could actually be disruptive and may do more to hurt than help election integrity and public confidence in elections. And they just pointed out some of the unintended consequences, we assume they're unintended, that these bills could have, right? For example, one, that House Bill 772 is kind of a Freedom Caucus bill that would expand poll observers to 12 people at a time in a polling place. And they could walk around and video and audio people, and any election poll worker that got in their way would be guilty of a misdemeanor. How are you going to recruit poll workers like that?
Yeah, and that bill has not gotten a hearing. I don't think it's Has it been copied into other bills?
No, it has not yet.
Okay.
But it has had a hearing in judiciary.
Oh, okay.
And it got through that. So it is in perfect position to be inserted into 747, which would make a lot of sense, or 749, whichever.
Yeah.
And then 749 is the one that would do the big overhaul of elections boards. But one thing that we didn't talk about a lot in that bill, because there was a lot in that bill, is that it would put county boards of commissioners instead of county boards of elections in charge of choosing county elections directors. The problem with this that the election board members noted is that the elections, the commissioners have elections. So the elections director will be overseeing their elections, whereas the election board is appointed. So, they don't have any skin in the game as to who they pick, but they do have to supervise the person. So they said, that should go back too. But, we heard from Lauren Horst over in Berger's office that they are interested in the feedback. We'll see.
Yeah, and the letter also asked for funding for the state election information management system.
They've been asking for that for years. This system is so woefully outdated. It is amazing to me. It looks like C-prompt DOS.
It's like the backbone of our elections.
Yeah.
And it sounds like they may get the money. It sounds like the House and the Senate, from what we're hearing, are looking at this and with paying attention to it. So I think that would be a fairly big deal for things that we don't pay attention to and that we hope work great.
Yeah, until they don't. You don't pay attention until they don't work, right?
But I mean, so that money, it sounds like is moving forward, but we'll have to keep an eye out on that. So medical marijuana, probably dead. We've said that before. The speaker is kind of...
Things come back to life sometimes.
Yeah, I don't put a ton of stock into it, given who the players are and what everybody wants. Yeah, maybe. I'll believe it when I see it, so...
And then we should also talk about those overrides coming up Wednesday, we think, although we know that at least one Republican House member is going to be out. So it probably depends on who else is going to be out to see if they're going to move those forward. There's 4 on the calendar, right?
Yeah, it's the Fairness in Women's Sports Act, the Charter School Review Board, which changes the board that looks at charter schools.
It decides whether to give them charters, right?
And I believe it gives charter schools themselves more say in that process. One of the gender transition bills, House Bill 808, and then House Bill 488, which is I had not paid attention to the bill, or certainly not enough attention. It has to do with it's called Code Council Reorganization.
Right. This would split up the Building Code Council.
Okay.
So it would split, and it would make some changes to things that would make it easier for people to build multi-family housing. But there are real concerns from the Fire Marshals Association and others that some of the changes that it would allow to be made would make those buildings less safe.
Interesting. That one passed the House at least 93-26. Maybe Democrats come home on that one.
And then we got the Fairness in Women's Sports.
Right. So those are potentially next Wednesday, but everything, like you said, attendance dependent at this point in the session.
Absolutely. And as of right now, what we've been told is that the Senate does not have plans for votes, but that could change.
For next week. The Senate does not plan to have votes next week. Yeah.
But that could change. So we will find out on Monday when they meet. We'll see what they take.
All right. That's all I got.
That's all I got, too. But thank you all for listening. Stay cool.
Yeah.
It's nasty out there.
Humid.
All right. And join us next week. Thank you.